see and feel things we've never heard, seen, or felt before. Now, these revolutions have always played a huge role in the evolution of art forms, by marking the end of old trends and the start of new ones. Like music, for example. If you take the decades of the 20th century, each one can be associated with a specific genre of music. Like the 1940s associated with swing music, the 1960s with rock music, or the 1990s with hip-hop music. That's just a bit of context for what I'll be talking about today. Moving on to the problem. What about the decade we're currently living in? Where's our revolution? 7 years into the 2010s, I don't think we've done anything significant enough to make us stand apart from these other decades. So initially, when I found out I'd be given the opportunity to deliver this talk, I thought I'd talk about this problem of a lack of a revolution in the 2010s, and perhaps offer a solution to it by answering a question. And this question was how to make a revolution. Now at first I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine. Sorry about that. So at first I thought I'd offer a solution to this problem, and that seemed easy enough. But as I did my research, I realized I just couldn't figure it out. Now, I still had a talk to give, and I still wanted to talk about revolutions. So I couldn't find a solution, so I decided, let's just change the question, right? To something even more basic. And I was inspired to come up with this new question through these articles I came across during my research. And these articles were titled along the lines of why music is dying, or is creativity endangered. And what these articles talked about was how, in today's day and age, we weren't innovating anymore. We were just using ideas people had already come up with and repeating the same thing over and over again. So this made me realize that before I could ask myself how to make a revolution, I needed to answer, is it even possible to make a revolution in this day and age? And that's what I'll be talking about today. So, to figure out an answer to this question, I took a look at history. Now, we know revolutions have been made in the past, like I already said, in the 1940s, the 1960s, and so on. So what could have changed between then and now that could lead one to believe that, sure, it was possible to do this back then, but it just isn't anymore? So to figure this out, I compared the 1960s with today. And the reason I chose the 1960s was because that's when the Beatles came up. And the Beatles, if you don't already know, are widely regarded as one of the most influential group of musicians of all time. Now, I compared their situation with our situation, and I found a bunch of differences. And I'll be going through some of the main ones today. So the first difference I found out was time. So you see, back in the 1960s, one day used to have 24 hours. Unsurprisingly, one day still has 24 hours. That hasn't changed. However, what has changed is the amount of time people have to devote to what they want to do. Let me tell you what I mean by this. So the Beatles, right, they were passionate about music. And what the 1960s allowed them to do was pursue music full time before they were even famous or before they were even signed to a music label. And the reason the 1960s allowed them to do this was because, one, the cost of living back then was a lot cheaper. And two, the amount of jobs in the music industry were a lot higher, and also there were a lot less people competing for these jobs. Now, how has that situation changed today? See, the thing is, today it doesn't matter if you live in a big city or a small city. If you aren't already famous, you can't hope to make a living from music. And that's because everything is just so much costlier. And that's why if someone wants to pursue music in this day and age, they need to get themselves a normal job first. Now, what this normal job does to a person is it takes their time away. So if in the 1960s, the Beatles could practice music 24 hours a day with nothing else to worry about, in today's world, a musician would only get 4 to 5 hours. Now, that's why one reason why people say it's not possible to make a revolution anymore is that we simply don't have the time to make a revolution. That's the explanation. Now, do I agree with this? I do agree that people have less time today. However, I feel with the advancements in technology, we can do so much more in that little time. So let me just give you a quick example. So in the 1960s, if you wanted to record a studio album, you would have to go to a studio, book some time, this was very expensive of course, and then get a professional to mix it, and get another professional to master it. Today, someone can do that in their own home. right? They could produce music in their own home, which would be considered professional sounding back in the 1960s. Now, this doesn't mean it'd be good music, it just means it'd be professional sounding. Now, this is one of the many advantages I talk about. This is one of the many advantages which exist for us today. So I don't think it's fair to blame time as the reason as to why we can't make a revolution today. Anyways, moving on to the second point. The second point is the power of a record label. Now, back in the 1960s, record labels had a certain amount of power, and today they still have a certain amount of power. But this has significantly changed over the years. And I'll be explaining this using an example. And this example might seem very unrelated, but it adds up at the end. So suppose there's two bakeries, okay? This is the 1960s, by the way. And both of these bakeries sell cakes. And these cakes are the most special cakes in the world. And this is because no one else sells these cakes. And they taste really delicious. You can only find them at these two bakeries. Now, there's also these children. And the one thing these children want is to have a birthday party better than anyone else's birthday party, right? And the one way to have such a birthday party is to have something at the party which stands out. And that could be that cake, which I talked about previously. Now obviously that cake isn't free. To buy that cake, you need one of these blue tokens. So let me tell you how it would go down. So the child would go to the bakery, he'd give them the token, and in exchange he'd get a cake. Now this cake would allow him to have the best birthday party. But how does that relate to the power of a record label? Let's do some maths. So if you substitute in these values, you get that the child actually represents a musician, and the bakery is a record label. So in the 1960s, a musician goes to a record label, and if they like what he showed them, which is his skill or talent, then the record label would give him power. And what power meant back in the 1960s was a wider reach. So if you wanted to get famous without a label, you would have to go knock on people's doors and be like, hi, I exist, I make music, please check me out. But if you had a record label's power behind you, they could play a song of yours on the radio, and best know that by the next day everyone would have heard that song. That's the power that a record label offered to someone back then. Now let me tell you how that situation has changed today. So today you don't have two bakeries, you have 10 bakeries, okay? And these 10 bakeries all sell the same cake, so it really isn't that special anymore. Now the children are the same, fine. This time two of them have tokens somehow. But they figured out something. They've gone to a shop, they bought a recipe book, and they figured out how to make cake themselves. So the cakes really aren't that special at all. So if someone today went to a record label, they could show them their skill or talent, but the record labels can't give them power because they don't have that sort of power anymore. So back then, a record label could promise to make you famous. But today they can't do that anymore. And musicians have realized this. See, I could go on the internet, upload something, and it would have the potential to reach billions of people. The potential. And that's what the record labels could do in the 60s and no one else could. But since everyone can do that today, it just isn't an advantage. Now why is this important in making a revolution? See, the basic thing behind making a revolution is starting a trend. And what starting a trend means, in this terms at least, is that you need everyone to listen to your song, and you need everyone to like it in a matter of a few days, so that everyone just gets on it all of a sudden. Now, the record labels could guarantee this in the past, but they can't anymore. That's why another reason why people say it's not possible to make a revolution anymore is that it's impossible to start a trend. Now, do I agree with this? I agree that it's significantly tougher to start a trend, but to say it's impossible is an absurd concept to me. And I'll explain why using the same example. So if you look at today's world, we know that having a cake is no longer that special a deal. But that doesn't mean that means that you can't use a cake to have a special birthday party. But what it doesn't mean is that you can't have a special birthday party at all. It just means you need balloons. See, what I'm trying to say is that even though a wider reach is an advantage for people, it doesn't mean we've run out of advantages altogether. And that's why at this point of my speech, if you ask me, is it still possible to make a revolution? I would say yes. Let's see if that changes in my last point. My last point is an idea. And this, I feel, is the most important one. See, you can have all the power, time, and money in the world, but without an idea, it would still mean nothing. What the Beatles had was an idea. And it wasn't just any idea, okay? They didn't just make a song, they made a whole new musical genre. And that's very tough to comprehend. I mean, I couldn't understand it myself because I haven't been part of such a revolution. I wasn't born back then, right? But I feel I can sort of understand if I recall it from about a year back. I listened to a song by this artist called Frank Ocean, right? And the type of music he made, it existed back then, but to my ears it was completely new. And I loved it. Now, that's what the Beatles did, but on a much grander scale. So their music wasn't new to one person's ears, it was new to everyone's ears. And that's very tough to do. Now, let me tell you why it's tough, okay? I tried to do this myself a couple of years back, so I can vouch for just how difficult it is. So back in the 6th grade, I played guitar. And I had all the basics down, I was like decent at it. But I said, okay, you know what, that's not enough. I want fame out of this and I want money out of this. So what I decided was to make something new, make my own composition. Now also, my favorite song at the time was a song called "Scarce" by a band called Led Zeppelin. And I love this song. And everyone loved this song actually. It's one of the most beloved rock songs of all time. So what I did was, I learned how to play the song on the guitar. Then I changed a few notes around, okay? And what I thought was, oh, you know what, I've made a completely new song that's just inspired by "Stairway to Heaven." And since people love that so much, they must love my song. Now, I later found out this wasn't true because I uploaded it to YouTube. It got a couple of views, a couple of dislikes too, but I said they were just haters, everyone had them. But then one comment particularly stuck out to me, and this comment said, "This song is just a rip-off of "Stairway to Heaven." And it took me a while to come to terms with this, but later I realized what he had said was true. I hadn't innovated, because what an innovation needs is for you to input something that no one else can input. What I had just done was copy. And this is why making a revolution is so tough, because you need an idea that no one else has thought of. So why could it be that someone could do this back in the 1960s, but they can't do it today? Now, people argue that back in the 1960s, we had a lot of ideas. But over time, we have used up all these ideas. So basically, the universe has screwed us by giving us such a limited set of ideas that today, all we can do is copy. Now, do I agree with this? No, of course not. I mean, music is virtually, if not literally, infinite in nature. So to just simply assume that we've run out of everything, that's just very unfair, in my opinion. At least, so basically at the end of my speech, if you still ask me, is it possible to make a revolution? My answer remains yes. Now, I know that was quite a long, winded speech for just a simple yes or no answer, but what I wanted to share was the reasoning behind the answer more than the answer itself, and I hope it proves to be as thought-provoking to you as it was to me. Now, the last thing I would like to address as I wind up my speech is how at the start I said I didn't know how to make a revolution. Now, you know what, maybe I do know how to make a revolution, right? But hypothetically, even if I did, that's not something I'd be telling you about. Because I feel there's some ideas worth sharing, then there's other ideas worth stealing. And if I tell you how to make a revolution, that would be an idea worth stealing. Now obviously you don't have to believe me when I say this. You can be like, no, I'm just all talk and nothing else. But I think I have something that could convince you, even slightly, that I know what I'm talking about. So look at this. Let me tell you what this is before you read it. It's what one critic said about the Beatles a couple of months before they dropped their most historically famous album of all time, okay? Now, this is a couple months before they dropped that one album that solidified them in history. And they said, I'll just read a bit of it out. Visually, they're a nightmare. Musically, they're a near disaster. Guitars and drums slamming out a merciless beat that does away with secondary rhythms, harmony, and melody. The lyrics are a catastrophe. They said this about the Beatles. This is what someone commented on one of my YouTube videos a couple of days ago. It's the first song ever, right? Now, I'm a believer in trends. So if the Beatles got famous a couple of months after that, best know there's big things in store for me. Thank you.